He became a hero instantly. The Chinese made him, and 1,000 brave Chinese persons attended his funeral. I mean, to attend his funeral meant you were opposing the emperor. And 2 or 3 generations later, an emperor made him the #1 philosopher behind Confucius, and he's elevated to a high position. Again, folk, this is the way the world oftentimes does its spiritual, religious, philosophical leaders. Kills them and then elevates them to a high position. If only we hadn't killed them. But anyway, the next one after Chu Si was Yang Ming. He's the one who investigated the bamboo shoot and said, I spent weeks looking at the bamboo shoot and learned nothing. But again, he disagreed with Yang Wang Mang on several points. These philosophers, now here's something else now that I want to emphasize, folks. Morality. These philosophers emphasized morality. All right, where did it lead them? Well, they said, we should not have paper money because paper money leads to greed. They convinced their emperors to destroy all the paper money. Hey, folk, they got off to a right start, but somebody had came along the way and sabotaged the right start. Then they told the emperors, you shouldn't have all these banks. These banks encourage greediness, and also money should never, here they were copying Aristotle, money should never be loaned out for interest, and people who borrow money should never pay interest on money they borrow. Hey, don't get me wrong, I'm teaching about this. Don't quote me on this out of context. I mean, because when I borrow money, I pay interest, and when you do, you pay interest also. And when banks loan money, but again, this was their philosophy. As for these big ships they built, destroy them, they're leading to greed. We don't need these products that they're carrying between our country and the other countries. So the big ships were destroyed. Out went the banks, out went the paper money, out went, and all of it was done in the name of morality, in the name of fighting greed, as if greed was something awful, folk. Someone pointed out in the West it was greed. It's greed that has led to the invention of the light bulb. Greed led to the mass production of automobiles. Greed led to the mass production of airplanes. Greed has led to the mass production of desktop and laptop computers. Is greed always that bad? Yes.
I would say the leading force behind behind invention of greed, but
Yeah, you can say that, but
I'm imagining that, Thomas Edison wasn't inventing the light bulb to get rich.
he didn't get rich from it. He got a living, but he didn't do it.
And most other inventions were either accidents.
Necessity, accidental
Accidents
necessity.
or war.
But again, this is again, don't quote me out of context. This is the Chinese way of thinking, the Chinese philosopher's way of thinking. Yeah, and the thinking as opposed to Westerners who say greed led to this thing. Again, they're taking a slight twist to history. You're right, I'm not arguing. But they're taking a slight twist to history. Now, I want to say this about morality, folk. It's necessary. But I compare morality to the brakes on a car. The brakes do not get you anywhere. And the only reason you ever get in a car is to go somewhere. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm going to say the brakes will keep you from going places you don't want to go. But they won't get you anywhere. If you make a car that has nothing on it but good brakes, solid brakes, sound brakes, you can sit in there for your whole lifetime and get absolutely nowhere. That is morality for you. The Chinese philosophy emphasize morality at the expense of achievement, at the expense of getting ahead. Morality is wonderful. Morality is important. Just like the brakes on your car are important. And if they start going bad, in fact, by coincidence, I'm driving a rented car today because my brakes went bad over the weekend. So I'm driving a rented car today. Why? The brakes are nothing to fool with. When the mechanic says they're wrong, fix them now. Serious issue, folks. Real serious. But they'll get you nowhere. Same way with morality. Good morality will not get you, it'll keep you from going places you don't want to go. but it won't get you anywhere. And a lot of people are wondering if the Chinese philosophers didn't keep them from developing. All right, now, leaving that, now I'm going to get back to the political history. Genghis Khan. Of all the world's conquerors, and I'm comparing Genghis Khan now, he's been compared to Cyrus the Great, to Sargon of Akkad, to Julius Caesar, to Cyrus the Great. All of these conquerors were born high up. Julius Caesar was from one of the biggest, richest families in Rome. Alexander the Great was the son of the most powerful king in the Mediterranean world. Cyrus the Great was the grandson of the king of Persia, the most powerful kingdom in that part of the world at the time. Genghis Khan started out in poverty. He was the son of a nobleman, true, but when he was 10 years old, his father was poisoned on a trip visiting some unfriendly tribe. Genghis Khan rode back to his tribe, intending to take over, and all the men in the tribe left and left him with a few women to lead. And by the time he was 10 years old, till the time he was about 20, he was in charge of a very insignificant tribe of people, impoverished. He was actually captured one time and held in prison for a while. Now he and Attila the Hun had one other thing in common. They both had older brothers. And when the older brothers interfered with the plans, they both killed their older brothers to get their older brothers out of the way. Again, this I think I ought to throw in because sometimes people who do this get far, far ahead in life. Anyway, I'll have more to say about Genghis Khan's ruthlessness in a little bit. Make a long story short now, really short, Genghis Khan became friends with a certain tribe that was powerful. Then he managed to unite with that tribe and use that tribe in his own tribe that was now beginning to grow back again after about 10 years or so, began to develop, to conquer other tribes. And after a few years, he had done what no Mongolian ruler had done in history. He united all the Mongolians into a big nation. He had an army of about 100,000 highly skilled, highly trained men. These men wound up not only going into China and bringing down the Song dynasty. They did not conquer China, and not, at least not all of it. But then he turned his attention toward the West and went to the Muslim world. And he destroyed Muslim city after Muslim city. He went to Baghdad and killed the caliph there. And he destroyed and killed with utter ruthlessness. Now, folk, your book talks about, hey, he wrote how he just enjoyed killing. And he loved when the killing was over, hugging the women, the young women who his husbands had been killed, whose fathers had been killed. He got a particular thrill out of this. At one point, he went to a town and thought he destroyed it all. But when he got away from the town by a few miles, someone came to him and said, "Sir, so people were hiding in cisterns, they were hiding in basements, they were hiding under beds or whatever, and hiding in closets, and they'd come out." Genghis Khan turned around and went back and finished killing off all that's left. The only twang of conscience he ever showed was one time after destroying a town and killing everybody in it, he turned to one of his aides and said, "I wonder, sometime one of these people aren't going to remember what we did to them." That was the only twang of conscience he ever showed.
He said what?
He said, "I just wonder if sometimes if these people will ever remember what I've done to them." It's when after he killed one town after another. He had a little bit of fear that maybe they'd remember it. But he built up an empire that was one of the largest. Well, it was in name, it went all the way to the Arctic Circle, had all of Siberia, all of Mongolia, and much of China, and much of the Muslim world. He went into Russia and conquered Russia, and the Mongolians were destined to rule Russia for 200 years. And that led to the saying, "Scratch a Russian, and underneath the scratch you'll find a Mongolian." Russia was controlled by Mongolia. Now Russia, though, was huge. Russia served as a buffer that helped keep the Mongolians out of Western Europe. anyway, his armies got to Poland, and they fought a battle against the Polish, which nobody seems to know who won. But then, Genghis Khan died, and the Mongol army was called back home. When Genghis Khan died, to this day, nobody knows where he was buried. Supposedly, he was buried in a large field, and then thousands of horses were galloped over that field to make sure that nobody would know where it was. But the persons who did know where he was buried got a surprise waiting for them. They were all executed. And to this day, we have no idea, not even a foggy idea, where he was finally laid to rest. His tomb has not been found, not been seen, and perhaps, maybe, well, we have machinery equipment that we once didn't have. Anyway, when Genghis Khan left China, he died. 2 generations later, Kublai Khan, his grandson. Oh yeah, I've got to say there are at least 500 million people in Asia who carry some of Genghis Khan's DNA. According to what I've heard about DNA studies. Anyway, Kublai Khan. Now, we Westerners remember Kublai Khan because of a man named Marco Polo. Marco Polo was one of the few Europeans to ever go to China during this time period we're talking about. Marco Polo and his family went to China, went to the court of Kublai Khan, and he found favor with Kublai Khan. And he stayed there for 20 years. Then Marco Polo came back from China, fought a war and lost, but was put in prison. When he was in prison, he wrote a book about his adventures in China. Christopher Columbus read his book, and Columbus got the idea that, hey, I'd like to go to China. But he knew that the trip was long and hard, and Columbus thought, well, the best way to get would be to sail straight west, because after all, the earth is round. He didn't realize it was a 15,000-mile trip, and there were 2 big continents between him and China, between Spain and China. He apparently did not know this, so he never got to China. But anyway, now Kublai Khan also did the unthinkable. He tried to conquer Japan. While his fleet was on its way to conquer, Japan is the islands. While his fleet was on its way to conquer Japan, what they called a kamikaze came up. Now, kamikaze meant divine wind. Now, we're going to run into that term again in the 20th century. Anybody know in what context? Yes. Go ahead.
World War II.
World War II. Japan, toward the end of the war, they started having their pilots go on suicide missions. They load their planes down with explosives and send the pilots straight toward American ship. But few of them actually hit an American ship, owing to the fact that, number one, the pilots were believed to be highly drunk, even though we don't know that because none of them ever came back. And also, we later learned these planes were really hard to steer. But again, none of the pilots ever told us that because they never came back. The pilots made this one-way trip, and they terrified the Americans, who at first didn't know what is going on. These airplanes just keep on coming. A few of them hit an American ship, and mostly landed harmless into the water. But suicide bombing missions is what people do when they're desperate and have little chance to win. Or trying to fight an enemy who is superior to them. It's what they'll do. So, but anyway, Kublai Khan tried to conquer Japan. His fleet was dashed to pieces, and what little was left of them, they came back to China in defeat. Kublai Khan also set up his capital in what is today Beijing, which is still the capital. Now, I had someone ask me one time, because this capital used to be called Peking. After when did Peking become Beijing? Anybody know the answer to that? It happened when we began to learn more about how the Chinese pronounce their words. This is the way the Chinese have always pronounced it. And we Westerners thought it was Peking, but actually it was Beijing all along. So that's why it's now called Beijing. But A generation ago, it was called Peking. You have 2 generations ago, when I was a kid, it was called Peking, yes.
Is that what Peking duck came?
It's Peking, and it was because of the way that they spelled it, we Westerners interpreted it as being Peking without actually knowing. I mean, when you read a lot of books, just like I have done, you sometimes are mispronouncing words, and you realize, hey, the way I've been pronouncing it so long has been wrong. That's why your history book will try to pronounce some of these words. But anyway, it was a mistake on the part of we Westerners. The Chinese have always called it Beijing. Kublai Khan was part of the Yuan dynasty or Mongolian dynasty. Yuan, Mongolian. Again, under him, it turned out that these barbaric people quickly became civilized. Now, folk, there have been times when barbarian people came in and civilized. They were civilized by their conqueror. Pardon me, the people they conquered. They were barbarians. They came in. They saw the superiority of the civilization they conquered, and they adopted a lot of civilization. The Germans eventually were civilized by the Europeans, and the Mongolians were largely civilized by the Chinese, whom they had conquered. It doesn't always happen. And I want to say this about Europe. When the Germans conquered the Roman Empire, the German civilization was elevated, the Roman civilization was declined, and they got to somewhat of an equilibrium for a while. So they brought the Roman civilization down. We'll talk more about that when we come to chapter 12 and 13. But anyway, the Yuan dynasty turned out to be a good dynasty. It prospered. Here's what has helped China prosper a lot down through the time: Confucianism. It emphasized hard work, saving, obedience to authority, order, civilization. And this has helped the Chinese a lot. As was the case of all dynasties, though, they became old. Well, maybe old is not the right word I should use, but as they got richer, they became corrupt. Folk, it's really, really difficult for a government official to keep his hand out of the public pot, especially an absolute ruler. Now, we have problems all the time with government officials using the helicopter they're entitled to make personal trips with it. This becomes a scandal. I mean, this happens. And when I was in the National Guard, one of the generals used his helicopter, his position. He was supposed to use it only for military purposes, but he was caught taking his family onto vacation spots with the helicopter. And there was a case that occurred here in the nearby Georgia County where a superintendent of schools would use the school's janitor to come in and do work on his own personal house, repair work on his own personal house. And he paid this janitor with public taxpayer money. Yeah, I know, there was nothing wrong with him hiring the janitor and paying the janitor out of his own pocketbook. There was nothing wrong with that. But he used taxpayer money, and the janitor was on government taxpayer time. So he used that to beautify and clean up and do yard work on his own private home. This happens in our own country a lot. But you take an absolute monarch because this money is my money, and I can do with it. Now, don't quote me out of context, folks. No, government money is not mine. And we had a mayor of Atlanta, I think, recently got caught accused of some of the same stuff. That government money is my money, or no, it isn't. It belongs to taxpayers, and you're just entitled. You're not entitled. You're responsible for seeing this properly spent, but you're not to take anything more out of other than your salary and your wage, and maybe a few perks, like you're allowed to get gasoline for free to drive around the state if you're on the official government business. But not if just for a pleasure trip. You only can use public money or public gasoline if you're on official business. But Now, these dynasties, if you look at the Chinese history, it's one after another, the dynasties became corrupt, became corrupt, became corrupt. As they became corrupt, they lost respect. Then outside, somebody came in and overthrew them. And eventually the Mongol dynasty, which had pretty much adapted to Chinese life, was overthrown as all the other dynasties had been. All right. Hopefully you know more about Chinese history than you did when you came in, and hopefully as you study it, you'll learn even more. On Wednesday, we'll talk about Japan, Korea, and Vietnam, and I want to state, hopefully all of you already know that the United States has fought wars either against or with these people, all of them, during the last century. We fought against Japan, fought against part of Vietnam, and fought against part of Korea. And the Korea conflict was still going on until recently.